They say humiliation burns deeper than fire. That night, standing in my own dining room, while laughter echoed around me, I discovered how true that was. The man I trusted, the man who once kissed my forehead while telling me I was his pride, looked at me in front of his wealthy friends and reduced me to a joke. Before I continue, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this story, and share it with others. Your support helps us bring more powerful and emotional stories straight to you. Now, let me take you back to the evening when everything changed. I had spent 3 weeks planning that dinner. My husband, Daniel, had insisted that his colleagues from the firm were coming over, and I wanted to make it perfect. I wasn't rich like them. I didn't wear diamonds that glittered under chandeliers, or carry handbags that cost more than a month's salary. But I could cook. Cooking had always been my pride, the language through which I gave love. Every spice I chose, every dish I tested twice, carried pieces of me. My grandmother's recipe for slow-cooked lamb, the roasted vegetables marinated in herbs I grew in the small garden behind our house, the chocolate soufflé I practiced a dozen times until it rose just right. I wanted them to see that even if I wasn't one of them, I could still offer something valuable. When the night came, I dressed carefully, not extravagantly, just a soft navy dress that Daniel once said made my eyes look brighter. I put on a thin chain around my neck, nothing flashy, but meaningful because it belonged to my late mother. The table was set with the best we had: candles, polished silverware, fresh flowers from the garden. I had imagined their smiles, their polite compliments, maybe even surprised that someone like me could bring so much warmth into a cold corporate world. The doorbell rang, and with it, my nerves trembled. Daniel walked in with them, men in tailored suits, women in glittering gowns. Their laughter carried the confidence of people who had never worried about bills, people who thought struggle was just a word in a dictionary. At first, it went well. They admired the decor, the aroma drifting from the kitchen, the way the table looked inviting. I moved between the kitchen and the dining room, refilling glasses, making sure the courses came out hot and fresh. My heart swelled when one of the women said, "It smells divine." For a moment, I felt proud, but then, it began. It started with Daniel's smirk. He was always different around them, his voice louder, his gestures exaggerated. He wanted to fit in, to show he belonged in their world. And what better way, apparently, than to offer me as their entertainment. "Careful, everyone," he said, lifting his glass. "You might need strong stomachs tonight. My wife believes she's a chef." Laughter erupted around the table. My hands froze around the serving dish. At first, I thought it was just a poor joke, a slip of the tongue, but then he continued. "She spends hours in the kitchen, bless her heart, thinks she's running a Michelin star restaurant here." He winked at them, ignoring me completely. "But hey, if the food is inedible, at least the wine is expensive." The guests laughed harder. Some politely covered their mouths, others openly chuckled. My cheeks burned. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floorboards. The food I had poured my soul into suddenly felt like ashes. I forced myself to keep moving. I placed the plates before them, my hands trembling. The lamb, tender and rich with flavor, the vegetables, roasted to perfection, the soufflé delicate and proud. But Daniel did not stop. "This dish," he said loudly, pointing his fork at the lamb, "she claims it's a family recipe. Honestly, I think she just throws spices together and hopes for the best." They laughed again. I caught one of the wives giving me a sympathetic look, but she didn't defend me. Why would she? They were Daniel's people, not mine. Each insult was a knife, and Daniel wielded them with a smile. When dessert came, he leaned back in his chair, his arm around the man seated next to him, and announced, "All right, everyone, prepare yourselves. This soufflé may or may not collapse before you even taste it." Just like her patience whenever I ask her to cook less. This time, the laughter roared, my heart pounded, my throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to smash the dishes on the floor, to demand why he was doing this, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, silent, as though I had been turned into stone. The worst part wasn't just his words, it was the way they looked at me afterward. Not as a host, not as a person who had welcomed them into her home, but as a joke. Hours later, when the wine bottles were empty and their expensive cars drove away, I thought it was over. But Daniel wasn't finished. I began clearing the table, stacking dishes into the sink, when he came up behind me, his cologne mixed with the sour smell of alcohol. "You were too quiet tonight," he said. "You should have laughed with us, learned to take a joke." I turned to him, my voice trembling. "You embarrassed me, Daniel, in front of everyone. He shrugged. They expect entertainment. Do you think they care about your cooking? You should be grateful they even came. My eyes stung. I did this for you. I wanted them to see you have a wife who supports you, who makes an effort. Daniel smirked, and I gave them a story they'll never forget. That's how this world works. You play the fool, or you play the king. I can't be the fool, Savannah. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, while he snored beside me, untouched by the pain he had inflicted. I told myself it was just one evening, that maybe I could forgive him. But deep down, something shifted. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that mocking my cooking was just the first cut, and the deepest wound was yet to come. Because the debt, the betrayal, and the cruel twist that followed would break something inside me that could never be mended. And when it came, I would learn that sometimes the only way to rise from humiliation is to burn the bridges behind you. Asterisk. They say humiliation can be endured, but betrayal leaves scars that never fade. I had no idea the night of that dinner was not the end of my shame, but the opening act of something darker. A week later, I woke to the sound of the doorbell. The sun was barely rising, casting pale light across the kitchen. I wiped sleep from my eyes, wrapped my robe tighter, and opened the door. A man in a crisp uniform stood there, holding a clipboard. "Are you Mrs. Savannah Moore?" he asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. He handed me a thick envelope. "Delivery for you. Please sign here." Confused, I scribbled my name and took the envelope. When I opened it, my hands trembled. Inside was an itemized bill from the catering company that had supplied additional dishes for that humiliating dinner. The total glared at me like a cruel accusation. $4 to 80. My chest tightened. I had cooked nearly everything myself. The catering was supposed to be minimal, just appetizers. Daniel insisted we needed 4 appearances, but this invoice was monstrous, stacked with charges for extra wine, imported cheeses, specialty desserts I never approved, and the payment line carried my name, not Daniel's, mine. I stumbled to the table, my knees weak. There must be a mistake, I whispered to myself, but at the bottom of the invoice, clear as day, was Daniel's elegant signature, only it was not his own expense account listed. He had written down my personal credit line. I shook my head. No, it couldn't be. He would not do this to me. Not after everything I put into that dinner. When Daniel finally emerged, still yawning, adjusting his cufflinks as though preparing for another day of charming his wealthy colleagues, I thrust the papers at him. "What is this?" My voice cracked under the weight of anger and disbelief. He scanned the pages lazily, then shrugged. "The bill. Obviously. Why is it in my name?" I demanded. "Because," he said smoothly, "my accounts are already stretched, and you wanted this dinner as much as I did. Consider it your contribution." "My contribution." My voice rose. "Daniel, this is over $4,000. I never agreed to this. I didn't even order half of these items." He poured himself coffee, unmoved by my trembling hands. "Savannah, stop being dramatic. You care about appearances, don't you? You wanted to impress them with your little cooking show. Well, appearances cost money." Tears blurred my vision. "So you mocked me in front of them, and then you left me with their feast to pay for. Do you hear yourself?" He sipped his coffee calmly. "Do not twist this into something bigger than it is. Pay the bill. It will build your credit. You should be thanking me." Thanking him. The words burned like acid. That evening, while Daniel basked in the afterglow of his colleagues' praise at work, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the invoice. My savings were already fragile. That money was meant for our daughter's school expenses, for groceries, for the mortgage buffer I kept hidden just in case. Now, in one night, it would be gone. I paid it, not because I accepted it, but because I had no choice. I could not bear the shame of debt collectors knocking on my door, neighbors whispering that I had defaulted. I swallowed the pain and transferred the money. But inside me, something hardened. The humiliation of that night had left a bruise. The catering bill carved the bruise into a wound, and wounds, when left untended, begin to rot. Days turned into weeks. Daniel carried on as if nothing had happened. He smiled, he charmed, he boasted about his success at dinners and cocktail parties. To everyone else, he was the picture of a confident, accomplished man. To me, he was the stranger who had torn the veil from my eyes. I began to notice the cracks, the late nights at the office that smelled faintly of perfume when he returned, the missing amounts from our joint account that he explained away with vague excuses, the dismissive tone whenever I asked simple questions. One evening, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, playful, not the clipped business tone I was used to. She fell for it, he chuckled. She paid the bill without a fight. I told you, she's too naive to question me. My blood ran cold. Who was he talking to? I pressed myself against the wall, straining to catch every word. Yes, we'll meet tomorrow, same place. Don't worry, she suspects nothing. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was personal, intimate, cutting deeper than I could endure. That night, lying in bed beside his sleeping form, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of two truths pressing down on me. First, the man I loved was mocking me not just to his colleagues but to someone else, someone hidden in the shadows. And second, if I stayed silent, if I kept swallowing this pain, I would disappear. I rose before dawn, my body trembling but my mind sharp with determination. I went to the drawer where I kept old journals and pulled out a blank one. On the first page, I wrote in bold letters, "He will not break me." Every day after, I recorded everything. Every insult, every unexplained absence, every missing dollar. I documented the bill, the phone call, the expressions on his face when he thought I was not watching. It was not yet revenge. It was survival. But survival has a way of sharpening into resolve. One afternoon, as I folded laundry, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The words were simple, but they shattered what little hope remained in me. "Tell your husband to stop promising me dinners he cannot afford, or maybe you will cover them like last time." My hands shook. The message came with a photograph. Daniel, seated in a fancy restaurant, smiling across the table at a woman I had never seen before. Her hand rested possessively on his dot. The catering debt was not a mistake. It was a pattern. He had been entertaining her, using me as his safety net, mocking me in public while privately spending my sacrifices on another. I sank to the floor, clutching the phone. Rage, grief, and a cold clarity surged through me. Daniel thought I was weak. He thought my silence was submission. But what he did not realize was that silence can also be the sound of a storm gathering. That night, when he returned home, I greeted him with a smile. I served dinner without a word of accusation. I listened to his stories, his hollow charm, but inside, I had already crossed a line. The woman he betrayed me with might have thought she was winning. Daniel might have thought he was untouchable. But I was no longer the naive wife who cried into her pillow. I was the woman who had paid the debt. And now, I was the woman who would collect it back with interest. The storm had begun, and Daniel had no idea he was standing directly in its path. The moment I stepped outside after that humiliating dinner, the night air felt colder than usual. It was as if the world itself had joined my husband in mocking me. My heart thudded heavily inside my chest, each beat echoing the shame I had endured in front of his friends. My husband hadn't only mocked my cook, and he had stripped me of my dignity and then left me alone to bear the burden of a debt I never agreed to. Before I go further, I want to remind you, if you are watching this story unfold and it stirs something in your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share it with others who might feel the weight of betrayal, as I did. What happened to me that night is something no wife should endure, and by staying with me, you will see how I chose not to remain a victim of his cruelty. I walked to my car in silence, gripping the keys so tightly they nearly bent. My mind replayed every laugh, every sneer, and every dismissive glance my husband had thrown at me during the dinner. His words had cut deeper than any blade. "This is what I have to live with, a woman who cannot cook." What haunted me even more was the way his friends chuckled at my expense, clinking their glasses while I sat frozen, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. My husband had enjoyed their laughter, his pride inflating with every insult thrown my way. And when the bill arrived, he slid it across the table, as though I were nothing more than an unpaid servant, leaving me not only humiliated but financially responsible. As I sat in my car that night, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't allowed myself in years. Real, burning, transformative anger. I had always been patient, forgiving, willing to overlook his harshness in the name of love. But that night, love felt like a noose around my neck. The drive home was a blur. My knuckles turned white around the steering wheel, as thoughts of revenge tangled with thoughts of escape. I had given this man everything, my time, my care, my loyalty, only for him to repay me with shame. Something inside me shifted. I decided then and there that I would not sit quietly any longer. When I entered our house, the scent of the food I had spent hours preparing still lingered in the air. It mocked me, reminding me of how he had sneered at every dish. The plates were still stacked in the sink, the leftovers untouched, proof of my wasted effort. I stared at them for a long moment, then began clearing everything away. My movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as though I was erasing the evidence of his cruelty. By the time he finally stumbled home, drunk from celebrating with his friends, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of me. He looked at me with that same careless smirk and said, "You're still sulking. Don't take everything so seriously." Those words ignited something sharp in me. For the first time in years, I met his gaze without flinching. "You humiliated me tonight," I said calmly. "You mocked me in front of people you respect more than your own wife, and then you dumped your responsibility on me as if I were a servant. Do you even realize what you've done?" He laughed, pouring himself another drink. "You're overreacting. They were jokes. Everyone laughed, didn't they? You should learn to laugh at yourself." I clenched my fists under the table. "Jokes," I repeated. "Do you know what it felt like, sitting there while you treated me like a fool? Do you know how small I felt when you made me pay for everything while you basked in their applause?" He shrugged, sipping his whiskey. "You're too sensitive. If you can't handle a few jokes, maybe you shouldn't host dinners." That was the moment I knew he would never understand. He had no remorse, no awareness of the pain he caused, and that was when my anger hardened into resolve. If he thought I would keep playing the role of his silent, submissive wife, he was wrong. Over the next few days, I began to plan. Every morning, I rose earlier than him and made lists in my notebook. I tracked the catering debt he had forced onto me. I studied our joint finances, realizing just how much control he had seized over the years. My name was on so little, and his was on nearly everything. He had not only humiliated me publicly, he had quietly been erasing my independence. But he underestimated me. He thought I was broken. He thought I would retreat into silence. He was wrong. One evening, as he prepared for another night out with his friends, I confronted him again. "You owe me an apology," I said firmly. He scoffed. "For what?" "Being honest. If you're a bad cook, you're a bad cook." "Do you want me to lie?" I stepped closer, my voice sharper. "No. I want you to treat me with respect. I want you to stop parading me like a joke in front of your friends. And I want you to take responsibility for the debt you left me with." His eyes narrowed. "Debt? That was nothing. You'll figure it out. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Fixing problems." Something inside me snapped. I realized then that he would never change. His arrogance was a shield, protecting him from accountability. And if I stayed, I would drown under the weight of his disdain. That night, while he was out drinking, I sat in our bedroom and looked at the life we had built together. The framed photos, the gifts we had exchanged, the wedding ring on my finger, all of it felt like props in a play where I had been cast as the fool. I removed my ring, set it on the nightstand, and whispered to myself, "This ends now." The suspense of what I would do next kept me awake until dawn. Would I leave him? Would I fight him? Would I let the world see the truth about the man he really was? By the time the sun rose, I had my answer. I would not just leave quietly. I would expose him. I would take back the power he had stolen from me. If he thought mocking my cooking and leaving me with debt was the final act of our story, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The fire inside me had been lit, and there was no turning back. Inside me had been lit, and there was no turning back. The morning after my decision, the world looked different. The same walls, the same furniture, the same silence of our house. All of it felt foreign now. It was no longer a home. It was a prison, and the man I had once promised to love had become my captor. Before I continue, if you are watching this unfold and your heart aches with me, please remember to subscribe, like, and share this story. What you are about to hear is not just a tale of betrayal, it is a testament to what happens when a woman refuses to be silenced. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open, my pen scratching against the paper with purpose. For weeks, I had lived under his shadow, forced to bear the humiliation he threw at me in public and the burden of the catering debt he left me with. But today was different. Today, I was drawing a map to my freedom. The first step was to gather evidence. If I were to free myself, I couldn't just walk away empty-handed. I needed proof of his spending, his lies, and the way he manipulated me. So while he was at work, I went through our files, our bank statements, and his receipts. What I found made my stomach twist. There were charges I had never seen before: lavish dinners, expensive bottles of wine, payments to catering services I hadn't hired. He had been hosting his friends long before the night he humiliated me, and he had been doing it behind my back. Worse, he had been putting many of those expenses in my name. The catering debt wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. He had been using me as a shield, a scapegoat, someone to blame while he played the generous host to his friends. My humiliation had been planned, and I had been foolish enough not to see it sooner. Anger churned inside me, but it gave me strength. Every receipt I collected, every statement I copied, became a weapon. I wasn't just preparing to leave him, I was preparing to expose him. That evening, when he came home, I acted as though nothing was wrong. I served him dinner quietly, watching the way he devoured the meal without a word of thanks. He didn't notice my calmness, didn't sense the storm building beneath my skin. He believed I had accepted his cruelty, as I always had. That was his first mistake. After dinner, he leaned back in his chair, sipping his whiskey. "So, have you figured out that catering bill yet?" he asked casually, as though it were a trivial matter. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm handling it." "Good," he muttered, waving his hand dismissively. "That's what you're here for, isn't it? To handle things." My chest tightened, but I kept my smile polite. If he saw the rage in me now, my plan would unravel. I excused myself, went upstairs, and locked the bedroom door. Under the bed, I tucked away the folder of documents I had gathered, proof, evidence, the beginning of my escape. But I wasn't ready to leave yet, not until I could ensure that when I walked away, he would be the one left broken, not me. Days turned into weeks, and I played my role carefully. I cooked his meals, cleaned the house, smiled when his friends visited. But behind the mask, I was watching, listening, collecting. Every insult, every careless word, every cruel smirk, it all fueled the fire inside me. One night, while cleaning his jacket, I found something that stopped me cold. A folded paper in his pocket, crumpled from use. I opened it and read the words, my hands trembling. It was a catering contract for another event, but this time under my name again. He had already scheduled another dinner with his friends. And once again, he was planning to throw the debt onto me. The realization hit me like a blade to the chest. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a pattern, a scheme. He wasn't mocking me out of carelessness. He was using me deliberately. My name was his safety net, his tool for reputation. And I was nothing more than a pawn. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, the contract clutched in my hands, and for the first time, I felt no fear, only clarity. He had built his pride on my humiliation, his friendships on my sacrifices, his reputation on my silence. That silence was about to end. The day of his next dinner arrived. I watched as he prepared, humming to himself, while he polished glasses and arranged the dining room. He was excited, oblivious, convinced that everything would go as smoothly as before. He didn't know that this night would not end the way he planned. As his friends arrived, the house filled with laughter and clinking glasses. I stayed in the kitchen, quietly observing. My husband played the role of the charming host, boasting about his success, pretending he had paid for the evening. I could hear his voice carrying through the walls, filled with arrogance, but this time, I wasn't going to sit in silence. When the meal was served and the laughter was at its peak, I stepped into the dining room with the folder in my hands. Every eye turned to me, surprised by the seriousness on my face. My husband's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice low but sharp. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. "I think your friends should know the truth," I said calmly. His friends exchanged confused glances as I pulled out the receipts, the contracts, the statements. One by one, I laid them on the table. "Every dinner you have enjoyed here, every bottle of wine, every catered meal, it was not paid by him. It was paid by me. Or rather, it was forced onto me. This generous host you admire has been using my name to cover his debts. And when you laughed at me last time, when he mocked my cooking, he wasn't joking. He was setting me up to take the fall." The room fell silent. My husband's face turned red, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. His friends leaned forward, scanning the documents, their expressions shifting from amusement to disgust. "You're lying," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You're trying to make me look bad." "No," I said firmly. "I'm showing them who you really are." One of his closest friends picked up a receipt, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true? You've been making her pay for all of this." My husband stammered, but his confidence had cracked. The room that once echoed with laughter now buzzed with whispers of betrayal. His empire of lies was collapsing before him, and I was the one who had pulled the thread. I stood tall, my heart steady. "I will no longer carry your debt. I will no longer sit quietly while you mock me. This ends tonight." For the first time, My husband had no power over me. His friends looked at him with disgust, their admiration gone, his pride, his arrogance, his carefully crafted image, all shattered in that moment. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him to choke on the ruins of his own making. Behind me, I heard the murmur of his friends questioning, doubting, judging. He had lost everything he valued most, and I had finally taken back my voice. That night, as I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. My revenge had only just begun, but already I had struck my first blow. If exposing him in front of his friends was the first crack in his mask, what came next was the sound of it shattering. That night, I slept with my folder of evidence tucked beneath the mattress, my heart pounding with both triumph and unease. My husband had been stripped bare in front of the very people he valued most, and I knew he would not forgive me easily. Before I continue, if you are watching this story and feel the weight of what I endured, please do not forget to subscribe, like, and share. What you hear next is a lesson in how silence can be turned into strength, and how betrayal can be forged into power. I woke up early the next morning. The house was unnervingly quiet. He had not come upstairs after the dinner, and when I walked into the living room, I found him sitting on the couch with an empty glass in his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "You humiliated me," he said, his voice hoarse. "No," I replied, steady. "You humiliated yourself." The words hit him like a slap. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, but he only clenched his fists and stormed out of the house. I did not follow. I had no reason to. I knew his rage was only the beginning, and I needed to prepare for what was coming. The calls started that afternoon. His friends, those who had once adored him, rang me one by one. Some were apologetic, ashamed they had laughed at me before. Others were furious at him, disgusted by his deceit. With every call, his empire crumbled a little more. His pride, built on lies, was falling apart in the eyes of the people who had once fed it. But with every collapse comes desperation. And desperate men do dangerous things. 3 nights later, he returned home drunk, the stench of whiskey heavy on his breath. He slammed the front door so hard the frame rattled. "Do you think you've won?" he sneered, stumbling toward me. "You think you can make me look like a fool and walk away untouched?" "I do not need to make you look like a fool," I answered calmly. "You have done that yourself." His face twisted with rage. He grabbed a vase from the table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, the pieces scattering like sharp stars across the floor. "You are nothing without me," he spat. "You're a nobody, do you understand? A nobody." The old me would have shrunk at those words, but the woman standing before him now was not the same. I met his glare and said, "Then you will lose everything to a nobody." He froze. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not because of me, but because he realized I was no longer afraid of him. He stormed upstairs and slammed the bedroom door, leaving me alone with the shards of glass glinting at my feet. I cleaned the mess, each sweep of the broom reminding me of the pieces of myself I had gathered after every insult, every betrayal. I had rebuilt myself before. I would do it again. The next morning, I visited a lawyer. Sitting in that quiet office, with the smell of leather chairs and polished wood, I spread out the evidence I had collected. The lawyer listened, nodding slowly as I spoke, his pen scratching across the page. "This is strong," he finally said, tapping the folder. "You have proof of financial fraud, manipulation, and reckless spending tied to your name. If we file for divorce, not only can you walk away free of the catering debt, but you may also be entitled to restitution." The word hung in the air like a promise. Restitution. I left the office with papers in hand and determination in my step. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath my feet was solid, but I also knew my husband would not go down without a fight. That evening, when I returned home, the house was dark. Too dark. I stepped inside cautiously, my heart thrumming in my chest. Then I heard the creak of a chair, the sound of breathing in the living room. He was waiting for me. The glow of a single lamp lit his face, and the sight sent a chill through me. His expression was calm. "You went to a lawyer," he said softly. Almost conversation allied on my stomach tightened. "How do you know?" He leaned back in the chair, smirking. "I have friends who know people. You think you're clever, but you forget who I am. You forget how much power I have." I took a step closer, my voice unwavering. "Your friends are not standing by you anymore. They know what you did, and soon, so will everyone else." His smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He stood, moving toward me, with slow, deliberate steps. "You're making a mistake," he whispered. "One you'll regret." I refused to back away. "The only mistake I made was believing you were ever the man you pretended to be." The silence between us was thick, electric. For a heartbeat I thought he might strike me, but instead, he brushed past, grabbed his coat, and left the house. The slam of the door echoed through the empty rooms, but this time, I was not shaken. This time, I felt stronger. The days that followed were a blur of preparation, meetings with the lawyer, filing papers, securing my accounts. Every step brought me closer to freedom, but also closer to the storm I knew was coming. Then came the twist I had not expected. A letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but inside was a note that made my blood run cold. It was from one of his friends, someone I had always distrusted. The note revealed something darker than I had imagined. My husband had not only been using my name for his debts, but he had also taken loans in my name, loans I knew nothing about. And those debts were not owed to banks, they were owed to dangerous people. My hands shook as I read the words. The catering humiliation, the financial betrayal, it had all been part of something much larger. He wasn't just reckless. He was reckless with my life. That night, I confronted him. I held the letter in my hand as I stood before him. "You've gone too far," I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "It isn't enough that you mocked me, that you humiliated me, that you left me drowning in catering debts. Now you've put me in danger with people I don't even know. Do you want to destroy me completely?" His face darkened. "You were supposed to be my shield," he snapped. "You were supposed to protect me." "I am not your shield," I shot back. "I am your reckoning." The room fell silent. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a recognition in his eyes. Recognition that the woman before him was no longer his victim. She was his downfall. I walked away that night with the letter clutched to my chest, my steps steady, my heart resolved. The road ahead was dangerous, but I had crossed the line of no return. He had mocked me, humiliated me, betrayed me. But now, I held the power, and I was going to use it. This was no longer just about escaping him. This was about destroying the empire of lies he had built on my back, and I would not stop until he had nothing left. Asterisk, the letter lay on the table in front of me like a loaded weapon. Each word on that page was heavy, suffocating, reminding me that this nightmare was far from over. My husband had not only mocked me, humiliated me, and buried me under debt's eye, now learned he had dragged my very identity into the hands of dangerous people. Before I go on, if you are following this story and feel the tension tightening with every word, please subscribe, like, and share. What comes next is not just a story of betrayal but of survival against the odds. That night, I could not sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like a threat. I locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and sat with my back against the headboard, clutching the letter as if holding it would give me control over the chaos spiraling out of reach. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I returned to the lawyer, the letter trembling in my hands. His calm expression hardened as he read it. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "These are not standard loans. These names, these terms, they are dangerous. If this is true, your husband has put you in a position where you could be held liable. You could lose everything, even your safety." My breath caught in my throat. "What can I do?" "First," he replied firmly, "you must protect yourself. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything, and do not confront those people directly. Let me reach out to authorities discreetly. But no, you are in a war now. Every move must be calculated." I left the office with his words echoing in my ears. "You are in a war now." When I returned home, my husband was waiting, leaning against the kitchen counter with his usual smirk. "You look tired," he said mockingly. "Lawyer meetings wearing you down." I stared at him, fury and fear twisting in my chest. "You used my name. You took loans in my name with people I do not even know. Do you realize what you've done?" He laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "I did what I had to do. They wouldn't lend to me, but they would to you. You should be grateful. You're more useful than you think." "Useful?" My voice cracked, but not from weakness. From rage. "You have turned me into your shield, your scapegoat, your punching bag, and now you have put me in danger. Do you think I will keep quiet?" His smirk faded. He stepped closer, his eyes cold. "You think you can fight me? You think those people will care about your story? They want their money, and if you stand in the way, they will not come for me. They will come for you." The chill in his voice sent shivers down my spine. For the first time, I realized he was not just reckless, he was willing to sacrifice me entirely to save himself. 2 nights later, the doorbell rang just after midnight. My heart jumped into my throat. When I peered through the peephole, 2 men stood outside. Their suits were sharp, their expressions colder than steel. I did not open the door. I stood frozen, barely breathing, as one of them slipped an envelope under the door. The sound of their footsteps fading into the night left me trembling. Inside the envelope was a demand, payment, immediate. The sum was staggering, and though my name was on the paper, I knew whose hands had guided the pen. My husband's betrayal had opened the door to wolves, and now they were circling. I confronted him the next morning, shoving the envelope into his chest. They came here. Do you understand? They know where I live. They are coming for me because of what you did. He opened the envelope, scanned the demand, and shrugged. Then pay them. The audacity of his words nearly made me scream. Pay them? With what? You think I will cover your debts again? You have destroyed my name, my reputation, and now you want me to feed these people money I do not even have. He sneered. If you do not, they will make your life very unpleasant. Trust me. Something broke inside me then. The man I had once trusted with my life had become my greatest threat. He was no longer just a cruel husband. He was a coward willing to feed me to predators so he could save his own skin. I made a choice that morning. I would not just walk away from him. I would burn the bridge behind me so completely that he would have nothing left to cross. I returned to the lawyer, the envelope in hand, and for the first time, I spoke every detail without holding back. The dinners, the debts, the humiliation, the receipts, the letter, the men at my door. I laid it all out. His eyes sharpened with resolve. We will involve the authorities, he said, but you must be ready. Once this starts, there is no going back. He will be exposed not only for fraud, but for endangering your life. I am ready, I said, my voice firm. I have lived in fear long enough. The days that followed were a blur of tension. I filed reports, handed over evidence, and waited as investigations began quietly in the background. I lived with the constant dread that at any moment, another knock would come at the door. But alongside the fear, something else was growing. Strength. One evening, as I sat by the window, I watched him pull into the driveway. He walked into the house, his arrogance still intact, unaware of the storm gathering around him. He poured himself a drink, smirking at me. Still playing the victim? He asked. No, I answered calmly. Not anymore. He asked. No, I answered calmly. Not anymore. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Then what are you? I looked him dead in the eye and said, your reckoning. For the first time, his smirk faltered. A flicker of unease crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with laughter. Still, I saw the crack in his confidence. He could sense the walls closing in, even if he did not yet know how close they were. That night, as he slept heavily in the bedroom, I sat awake, planning my next move. I was no longer simply gathering evidence. I was preparing for battle, and this time, I would not stop until he was stripped of everything he had stolen from my dignity, my safety, my peace. The dangerous men he had invited into my life were real, and I knew they would not vanish. But I also knew something else. When you shine light on darkness, it begins to shrink, and I was determined to shine the brightest light I could, no matter the cost. The woman he once mocked, the woman he once humiliated before his friends, the woman he thought would remain silent, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, unafraid. And soon, the world would know the truth. What he had done to me was not a private betrayal anymore. It was a crime. And this time, he would pay. Before I continue, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story so more people can hear it. The morning after I exposed James to his friends was not peaceful. It was as if the house had absorbed every drop of tension from the night before and stored it in the walls. I woke early, unable to sleep, my body buzzing with a strange mixture of adrenaline and dread. I half expected to see James storm out of the guest room, hurling accusations, demanding explanations, but he did not appear. Instead, the house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that makes you question whether you are safe in your own home. I brewed a pot of coffee, forcing myself to act normal. Yet every sip was bitter with the memory of James's humiliation at the restaurant. I replayed the look on his face, the way his friends had shifted uncomfortably, the sharp silence that followed my confession about the catering debt. It should have given me satisfaction, but instead it left a weight in my chest. I kept asking myself, had I gone too far, or had I finally given him only what he deserved? When James finally emerged, hours later, his face was expressionless, his hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, but his eyes carried a cold sharpness I had never seen before. He did not shout. He did not throw accusations. He simply sat across from me at the dining table, his coffee mug clinking softly against the wood as he poured himself a drink. "You embarrassed me," he said at last. His voice quiet, too quiet. "You humiliated me in front of my friends. Do you even realize what you've done?" I clenched my fingers around my cup. "Do you realize what you did? You left me with a massive catering bill because you wanted to play the perfect host. You mocked me in front of them like I was nothing. And when I stood up for myself, you call it humiliation." "James, I simply told the truth." His lips curled into a sneer. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think exposing me makes you stronger. But what you don't realize is that you've made yourself the fool. My friends don't respect you now. They pity you. They see you as a bitter woman, desperate for sympathy." The words sliced through me, but I refused to let him see me break. Better to be pitied than to be exploited. At least they know the truth. James pushed back his chair, the scrape loud in the silence. "You have no idea the damage you've done. You've ruined everything I've built. Do you think they'll trust me in business now, after watching my own wife undermine me? Do you think they'll invest with me after seeing that spectacle?" I inhaled sharply, realization dawning. This was not about shame, not about the marriage, not even about the betrayal. It was about money. It was always about money. "You're angry because they saw your mask slip," I whispered. "You're furious because they know you're not the man you pretend to be. And you're terrified they'll stop funding your illusions." His eyes flashed with rage, but he forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Illusions. You're the one living in a fantasy if you think this little rebellion of yours will last. You need me, Savannah. You've always needed me. Without me, you're nothing." For a moment, my chest tightened, an old reflex of fear and doubt rising. But then I remembered the catering bill with my name on it. I remembered the sleepless nights spent scrubbing, cooking, organizing, only for him to tear me down. And something inside me solidified. "No, James," I said firmly. "I don't need you. Not anymore. I see you clearly now, and once you see someone clearly, you can never unsee them." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. James stood still, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching at his sides. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Without another word, he stormed out of the house, the door slamming so hard that the frame rattled. I sat there, trembling. Relief and fear battled inside me. Relief because I had finally spoken my truth. Fear because I knew James. He was not the type to let go easily. He would come back, and when he did, he would come with a plan. The next few days confirmed my suspicion. James returned home but barely spoke to me. He disappeared for hours, sometimes overnight. His phone calls were hushed. His laptop closed whenever I walked into the room. At night, I lay awake listening to the faint creak of floorboards, the click of doors opening and shutting, as if he were moving around like a shadow plotting something I was not meant to see. One evening, I followed him. Quietly, I padded down the hallway and peeked into his office. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, James sat hunched over his desk, papers scattered everywhere. I saw bank statements, contracts, and something that made my blood run cold. Documents with my name on them. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a gasp. He was forging signatures. I could not see the details, but the sight was enough to confirm my worst fear. James was preparing something destructive. Something that would involve me whether I wanted it or not. Retreating silently, I returned to my room, my heart pounding. For hours, I debated what to do. Should I confront him? Should I call the bank? Should I go to the police? But the thought of exposing him again terrified me. Last time, I had faced only his anger. This time, it could be worse. And yet, the truth gnawed at me. If I did nothing, he could destroy me. The breaking point came 2 nights later. James came home unusually cheerful, whistling as he set down his briefcase. He poured himself a drink, his smile stretched to wide, his eyes glittering with something unsettling. "Savannah," he said, his tone smooth, almost charming. "I've been thinking, perhaps we need a fresh start, a new house, a new investment, something to wash away all the ugliness between us." Alarm bells rang in my head. "A new house?" I asked cautiously. He nodded, sipping his drink. "Yes, something bigger, better. I've already started the paperwork. You'll love it. It's in both our names." My stomach dropped. Both our names. That was what the documents in his office were. He was tying me into another financial trap. binding me so tightly that I could never escape without being ruined. I forced a smile, nodding, pretending to agree, while inside my mind raced. This was it. If I did not act now, I would lose everything. That night, while James slept soundly in the guest room, I tiptoed back into his office. The papers were still there, stacked neatly as if waiting for me. My hands trembled as I sifted through them. Loan applications, property documents, signatures, my signatures that I had never written. He was trying to put me in debt again, only this time, it was bigger than catering bills. This was a house, a future shackled to his lies. Tears stung my eyes, but clarity cut through the fear. I had to fight back, and not just with words. The next morning, I gathered every document I had, receipts, bills, screenshots of messages, even photographs of the forged signatures I had secretly taken with my phone. I placed them carefully into a folder. For the first time in years, I felt something close to control. When James left for one of his mysterious meetings, I walked into a lawyer's office. My voice shook as I explained everything, but the lawyer listened intently, his expression grave. "You've done the right thing," he said firmly. "You have proof, and that proof is powerful. But you must be careful. Men like your husband, when cornered, often lash out." I nodded, my heart hammering. I knew he was right. James was a storm, unpredictable and destructive. But I also knew I could not keep living in fear of him. As I left the office, folder clutched tightly in my hands, I looked up at the sky. For the first time in a long time, it did not feel like it was pressing down on me. It felt open, vast, full of possibility. But deep down, I also knew this was only the beginning. James would not surrender easily. The real battle was yet to come. Before I begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story so that more people can follow the journey. The day after I visited the lawyer, I woke up with a strange mix of dread and courage. For years, I had been walking on eggshells, my voice muted under James's control, but now I had a folder filled with truth. It felt like a weapon in my hands. Proof of what he was doing. Proof that I was not crazy. Proof that I had been wronged. But carrying that folder was like carrying fire. It could protect me, or it could burn me alive if James found out. Protect me, or it could burn me alive if James found out. When James came home that evening, he was unusually upbeat. He talked endlessly about new opportunities and important deals. Though he gave me no specifics, he cooked himself dinner, hummed while he ate, and barely looked at me. It was unsettling. His cheerfulness was not natural. It was rehearsed, as though he was performing a role. I knew then that the lawyer had been right. James was planning something bigger, and his smile was the mask he wore while building his trap. That night, as he locked himself away in his office, I sat on the living room sofa with my phone in hand. My lawyer had told me to stay vigilant, to gather as much evidence as I could. So I waited until James went to bed. When the lights in his office clicked off, and I heard his door close, I crept into the room once again. The desk smelled of whiskey and ink. Papers were neatly stacked in folders, but it was his briefcase that drew my attention. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside were contracts, bank slips, and a folder with my name printed boldly on the front. With trembling hands, I flipped it open. There it was, an application for a home loan worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The property was listed under both our names, but the signature at the bottom was not mine. It was a shaky forgery, close enough to fool someone at first glance, but wrong enough for me to spot instantly. My throat tightened. He was not just planning to trap me in debt, he was already doing it. I snapped photos with my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Then I placed everything back exactly as I had found it. As I tiptoed back to my room, one thought echoed in my head: he is going to destroy me if I do not stop him first. The next morning, James left early. He kissed my cheek, smiling as though we were a normal couple, and walked out whistling. The gesture chilled me. It was the kiss of a predator who thought he already had his prey cornered. I wasted no time. I called my lawyer, explained what I had found, and sent him the photos. His response was immediate. "Savannah, this is serious. He is committing fraud, and he is doing it in your name. If the bank processes this, you will be responsible for half that loan. We need to act now." My heart pounded. What do I do? Come in tomorrow. We will file a motion to protect you legally. But Savannah, you must be careful. If he senses what you're doing, he may try to retaliate. The word clung to me like smoke. That night, James came home late. I pretended to be asleep. Though my mind was racing, I heard him moving around, pacing, muttering under his breath. At one point, he stood outside my door, his shadow stretched across the crack of light at the bottom. I held my breath until the shadow disappeared. The next day, I dressed carefully, tucking the folder of evidence under my arm. But just as I was about to leave, James appeared in the doorway. His smile was too wide, his eyes too sharp. "Going somewhere?" he asked casually. My heart leaped into my throat. "Just running errands." He tilted his head, studying me, then slowly nodded. "Good. I was worried you were sneaking off to gossip about me again." I forced a laugh. "Nothing like that." But inside, panic clawed at me. Did he know? Had he seen me in his office? Was he already suspicious? I left quickly, my legs shaking as I walked down the driveway. When I finally reached my lawyer's office, the air felt lighter, as if I had escaped a cage, if only temporarily. The lawyer was waiting. We filed the necessary documents, alerting the bank and attaching proof of the forgery. He assured me that the fraudulent loan would be blocked. Relief flooded me, but it was brief, because blocking the loan did not block James. When I came home, James was sitting in the living room, drink in hand, eyes fixed on the door as though he had been waiting. "You were gone a long time," he said smoothly. "Groceries," I replied, lifting the small bag I had picked up on the way home. His gaze lingered on me, heavy and unblinking. "You're lying," he whispered, though he smiled as he said it. I can always tell. The glass in his hand tightened, his knuckles whitening. Then he set it down and leaned back. "It does not matter. Whatever you think you are doing, Savannah, you will regret it. Mark my words." The threat hung in the air long after he left the room. That night, sleep evaded me. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I thought about the years I had given him, the sacrifices, the dinners, the humiliations, and now here I was, hiding from my own husband, fearing what he might do next. But fear alone could not save me. I needed courage. The following weekend, James announced that he had invited a few close associates over for drinks. The word associates made my skin crawl. These were not friends. They were men who invested in his projects, men who believed in his polished lies. I spent the day in silence, preparing the house, setting out glasses and bottles, all while wondering what game he was playing. By the time the men arrived, my nerves were stretched thin. The evening unfolded in forced laughter and false charm. James boasted, they nodded, and I stood in the background, invisible. But as I listened, I caught snippets that made my stomach drop. He was pitching them the very property deal I had exposed. He spoke as though it was already secure, as though I had willingly signed every paper. I gripped the counter, fury burning in my chest. He was lying again, not just to me, but to them. And if they believed him, I would be dragged down with his sinking ship. One of the men turned to me, smiling politely. "Savannah, you must be excited about the new house. James tells us you insisted on the location. Very smart of you." My breath caught. This was it, the moment I had dreaded. The lie was spreading, and soon it would become my prison. I looked at James. His eyes were locked on me, daring me to contradict him. His smile was wide, his glass raised, but his gaze was sharp as a blade. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I never chose that house. In fact, I never signed for it at all." The room fell silent. The men looked between us, confusion and unease flashing across their faces. James's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He recovered quickly, laughing too loudly. "She is joking," he said smoothly. "Always the comedian, my wife." But I did not laugh. I stood tall, my heart hammering. "I am not joking. My husband forged my signature. He tried to trap me into debt, and if you invest with him, he will do the same to you." The silence deepened. The men exchanged uneasy glances. One of them set down his glass, his lips pressing into a thin line. Another shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing at James. James's face drained of color. His hand trembled as he slammed his glass onto the table, liquid spilling across the wood. "Enough," he snapped. "Go to the kitchen, Savannah." But I did not move. "No, James. Not this time." The weight of the room pressed down on us. His friends muttered excuses, gathering their things, and within minutes, they were gone, leaving James and me alone in the silence of our shattered home. James's chest rose and fell rapidly, his fists clenched. "You will pay for this," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You will regret the day you ever crossed me." My fear was real, but so was my resolve. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "The only one who should regret anything here is you." As he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, I felt my knees weaken, my body trembling. I had crossed a dangerous line, and I knew James would not forgive me for it. But for the first time, I did not care, because finally, I was no longer living in his shadow. Asterisk, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story so more people can follow along with what happened. Next. The night James stormed out after his friends left, I stayed frozen in the living room. My legs were weak, my palms damp, and my heart pounded so violently that I thought it might break free from my chest. I had stood up to him, spoken the truth in front of witnesses who mattered to him, and for the first time, his mask had cracked. But as much as I wanted to feel victorious, dread pressed down heavier than relief. I knew James too well. He was not a man who accepted humiliation quietly. He was a man who plotted, who retaliated, who turned every wound into a weapon. When he did not return that night, I barely slept. The house felt too large and too hollow, filled with shadows that seemed to whisper his threats back to me. By morning, my hands still trembled. I went through the motions of making coffee, but my stomach churned so violently that I could not swallow a sip. Around noon, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart leapt. James was home. I braced myself, but when I peered through the window, I froze. It was not James. Two men in dark suits stepped out of a sleek black car. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. A chill slid down my spine. I opened the door a crack, my voice unsteady. "Can I help you?" One of them produced a folded piece of paper. "Are you Savannah Miller?" "Yes," I whispered. "You've been served." He handed me the envelope, turned on his heel, and within seconds, both men were gone. I closed the door with shaking hands, ripping open the paper. My blood ran cold as I scanned the words. Divorce papers, filed by James. And not just divorce, there were claims against me. Accusations that I had mismanaged finances, that I had interfered with his business deals, that I had embarrassed him publicly and caused irreparable damage to his reputation. He wanted assets. He wanted money. He wanted blood. He wanted assets. He wanted money. He wanted blood. The paper slipped from my hands and fluttered to the floor. My knees gave way, and I sank into a chair, gasping for air. So this was his retaliation. If he could not control me in the home, he would drag me through the courts, smear my name, and strip me of everything. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, my voice cracking as I explained what had just happened. He listened carefully, then spoke firmly. "Savannah, this is what we expected. He is using the legal system as another weapon. But remember, you have evidence. You have proof of his lies and his fraud. Do not panic. This can be fought. Still, fear not at me." James had resources, connections, and a ruthless streak. I had truth. But would truth be enough? That evening, James finally returned. He walked into the house as though nothing had happened, his head held high, his suit crisp, his cologne filling the air. I stood in the hallway, the divorce papers clutched in my hand. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. He looked at the papers, then smirked. "Business. You made your choice when you embarrassed me. Now I am making mine. Consider it the beginning of a new chapter." My throat tightened. "A chapter where you destroy me." He shrugged casually, pouring himself a drink. "Do not be so dramatic. This is simple. You wanted independence. You wanted to play the hero in front of my friends. Fine, but independence has a price. You will not walk away from this marriage with dignity or with a penny." Anger blazed through me, cutting through the fear. "You cannot erase the truth, James. I have proof. I have documents. I know what you tried to do with that house loan." For a moment, his composure cracked. His hand tightened around his glass, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You think anyone will believe you? I am respected. I am trusted. You are just a bitter wife looking for revenge. Without me, you are nothing but noise." His words stung, but I held my ground. "We will see who they believe." He stared at me for a long time, then chuckled, low and menacing. "You have no idea what you have started." Over the next week, the battle began. Letters from his lawyer arrived almost daily, filled with venomous accusations and demands. James painted himself as the victim, the betrayed husband whose wife had sabotaged his reputation and finances. He demanded alimony, compensation, and control of our remaining assets. Meanwhile, my lawyer guided me through each step, filing counterclaims, attaching evidence of his forgery, his debts, his lies. The legal war was underway, and it consumed me. At night, James taunted me. "You think the courts care about your tears? They care about money, and I have more of it than you. But I refused to let his words break me. For every insult, I remembered the catering debt he had left me with, the way he mocked my cooking, the way he humiliated me in front of people who once called me his partner. As weeks turned into months, the tension in the house became unbearable. We moved like strangers through the same rooms, our interactions sharp as knives. Sometimes, he ignored me completely. Other times, he leaned close and whispered threats meant to shake me. You are going to lose, Savannah, and when you do, you will come crawling back, begging for the life you destroyed. But his threats no longer rooted me in silence. They fueled me. One afternoon, as I sat with my lawyer reviewing documents, he leaned forward, his expression grave. Savannah, there is something you need to see. He handed me a copy of a new filing from James's legal team. My breath caught as I scanned the pages. James was accusing me of fraud. He had turned the story around, claiming I had forged his signature on documents to make him look guilty. The room spun. He was not just lying, he was weaponizing my truth, twisting it into a dagger pointed at my back. Tears blurred my vision, but my lawyer's voice anchored me. Do not panic. This is exactly why we gathered so much evidence. You have photographs. You have receipts. We will dismantle this. Still, the cruelty of it all broke something inside me. James did not just want to win. He wanted to ruin me completely, to erase my voice until nothing remained. That night, I confronted him. He was in his office, sipping whiskey, the shadows of the room swallowing his features. I stood in the doorway, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. Why, James, why destroy me when you are the one who lied? Why take everything from me, when all I ever did was try to love you? He looked at me with cold amusement. Because you exposed me, and I will never forgive you for that. You could have stayed silent, Savannah. You could have played your part, but you chose war, and I do not lose. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. Then you underestimate me, because I will not stop fighting, James, not until the world sees you for what you truly are. His smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker. He slammed his glass down, the sound echoing through the house. Careful, Savannah, very careful. You are treading on dangerous ground. I met his gaze, my fear burning into defiance. So are you. When I left his office, I knew one thing for certain. The battle was nearing its climax. The lies, the legal games, the humiliations they were building toward an explosion neither of us could avoid. And as much as I feared it, a part of me welcomed it, because only in the fire of the final battle could I be free. Before I begin, let me remind you of one thing. If you have been following this journey and feeling every wound and every triumph with me, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to see that courage always finds its way. Now let me take you to the final chapter of my story, where pain turned into strength, and betrayal carved the path for liberation. The night I signed the last document at the attorney's office, I walked out into the cool evening air, my heart beating with a strange mixture of fear and freedom. For years, my life had been bound to a man who mocked me, belittled me, and left me drowning in debts I never asked for. And now, with a single signature, I had severed those chains, but freedom never comes without a price. The weeks that followed were turbulent. William refused to accept the divorce quietly. He showed up outside my workplace, trying to charm me back. He sent flowers with cards that said, "You know you cannot live without me." He called late at night, sometimes begging, sometimes threatening. Each call reminded me of the years I wasted believing his words. At first, my hands would tremble when I saw his number flash across my phone screen. I would feel that old fear creep in, whispering that maybe I should forgive him just to find peace. But then, I would remember the humiliation of that dinner, the jeers of his friends, and the crushing weight of the catering debt he abandoned me with. That memory was my shield, my reminder that peace would never exist with him, only pain disguised as love. One evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through unpaid bills, when I heard a knock at the door. My heart froze. I was not expecting anyone. The knock came again, harder this time. Slowly, I rose and peeked through the peephole. It was William. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck, and his face red with what looked like both anger and desperation. I hesitated. Then I opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. "What do you want, William?" I asked firmly. "You cannot just erase me like this, Savannah," he said, his voice cracking. "We built a life together. You owe me at least a chance to make things right." I stared at him, A flood of memories rushing through my mind, the promises he made and broke, the laughter of his friends when he mocked me, the crushing silence when I begged him for help. "I don't owe you anything," I said. My voice did not shake, and that surprised me. For the first time, I felt the strength in my own words. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're strong enough to live without me? You'll regret this. Mark my words." I shut the door in his face. His angry shouts echoed down the hall as I locked it. For a long moment, I leaned against the wood, my breath shallow. But instead of fear, I felt something new rising in me: power. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I had not done in years. "Today, I chose myself over him. Today, I won. I chose myself over him. Today, I won." The weeks stretched into months, and gradually, the storm began to settle. His calls grew fewer, his visits stopped, and eventually, it was as if he vanished from my life altogether. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was healing. I began to rebuild. I took on extra shifts, slowly paying off the debt. I enrolled in evening classes for catering and event management, determined to turn the very humiliation he threw at me into my greatest weapon. My small apartment began to feel less like a cage and more like a sanctuary. One spring morning, I was arranging fresh flowers on my kitchen table when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Savannah," a woman's voice said. "You don't know me, but I think we should talk." I was William's new partner. My heart skipped. I asked carefully. "Yes," she said. "He left me too, took money, made promises, then vanished. I found your name on some papers. I think you should know that you're not the only one he destroyed." The words hit me like a stone in the chest. For years, I had believed his cruelty was uniquely mine to bear. But hearing her voice, hearing the tremble in her tone, I realized he had been a storm in many lives, a storm I had finally escaped. I met her at a small cafe downtown. She was younger than me, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. She told me stories that mirrored my own, each one sharper than the last. And then something remarkable happened. As she spoke, I felt no jealousy, no rivalry, only compassion. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "You are not alone. He doesn't get to break us anymore." That meeting marked the beginning of something I never expected: a community. Slowly, I connected with others William had deceived, and together, we became each other's strength. It was not about revenge, it was about reclaiming our voices. Months later, I stood before a small crowd at a local women's shelter, sharing my story. My hands trembled as I held the microphone, but my voice was steady. I told them how a dinner turned into a nightmare, how debts piled like mountains, how betrayal nearly drowned me. And then I told them how I fought back, how I rebuilt, how I stood tall despite it all. The room erupted in applause, not for my suffering, but for my survival. In that moment, I realized my story was no longer just mine. It belonged to every woman who had ever been silenced, mocked, or abandoned. William may have left me with a catering debt, but I turned it into a new beginning. I now run a small catering business of my own. Every dish I create is not just food, but a symbol of resilience. When clients compliment my work, I smile, knowing that once, a man tried to shame me for cooking, and today, cooking became my victory. The last time I heard about William was through a passing comment. Someone said he had left town, burdened by lawsuits and unpaid debts. I did not feel anger or pity. I felt nothing at all, because he no longer had power over me, and that, my friends, is the greatest triumph. So if you are listening to my story today, let this be your reminder. No matter who tries to break you, no matter who laughs at your pain, no matter what debts or burdens they leave you with, you have the power to rise. You have the power to rebuild. And one day, you will look back and see that what was meant to destroy you became the very thing that saved you. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind someone else that they are not alone.